Welcome to a bonus episode of the Blooms of Barnacles podcast, where we talk about things tangentially related to Ulysses. I'm Kelly.
I'm Dermot.
And you already know that because you are a subscriber to our Patreon, and we thank you very much for being here. So, Dermot, our topic for this month is less tangentially related to Ulysses and more tangentially related to Dubliners, which we did a series on a couple years ago. If you haven't listened to the Dubliner series, go listen to that, especially for newer patrons. This is sort of a 2 years later capstone on that series. We are going to be talking about the not published anywhere officially, but self-published poem by James Joyce, Gas from a Burner. Does that mean anything to you?
This is a burn poem that he wrote for
Yes.
people he hated.
Specific people that he hated.
Yeah.
Though there are a few who catch strays in it, I think, unfairly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, always with him, yeah.
But yeah. Well, we'll see. I'd say hold your judgment till the end and
Okay.
see if you think it's fair or unfair. We talked years ago now about Joyce's poem, The Holy Office, which he wrote because he was frustrated with the status of the literary scene in Dublin. But Gas from a Burner has a different origin story. It arises from the very sordid publication history of Joyce's collection of short stories, which we read, Dubliners. Right. Now, basically anything that Joyce ever published had a complex publication history, because he was just like that kind of guy who made that kind of writing, as I'm sure we all know. But this one went on, I think, for 8.5 years, start to finish. And we covered some of it where, the various publishers he worked with wanted to make changes. He wouldn't make the changes. He did make some of the changes they asked for too, but it was sort of never enough. And he had to struggle to get Dubliners out in a form that he felt upheld his artistic integrity, basically. We're going to tell that story, and then Gas from a Burner comes at the end. I think the publication story is very interesting. There are some myth-making around it that the main article I'm going to lean on for this discussion kind of does some myth-busting around. Nothing major, but then we'll read the poem at the end. We'll see what you think of it.
Okay.
All right. This is an article I came across when I was researching, I think, our episode on Ivy Day in the committee room, and I kind of kept a little tab open thinking I'd like to come back to this, and now I'm finally coming back to it. It's an article by Claire Hutton called Chapters of Moral History Failing to Publish Dubliners. And she opens her article with a quote from Joyce to his eventual publisher for Dubliners, Grant Richards. When the contract was signed, I thought everything was over. And he wrote that in May of 1906, and Dubliners would not be published for many years later. 1915 it was published, so... The year is 1906. Joyce has written a series of stories that would become Dubliners. He hasn't written all of the stories, like The Dead would come in much later. Several others will come in later that we'll see cause problems in the story, but... 1906, young James Joyce has written this collection of short stories, and he has received a contract for publication of Dubliners from Grant Richards, who's described in Hutton's article as a highly reputable London publisher. But later in that same year, Richards reneged on their publication agreement. That's where that quote comes from. When the contract was signed, I thought everything was over. Very fateful remark. And that is Joyce objecting to Richards' complaints that we'll see, and we'll see what those are. Before landing with Richards, Dubliners had been rejected by many other publishers, including ones that were, reputedly supportive of Irish writers and the Irish literary revival. So we've talked a lot in our Ulysses discussions about Joyce's bitterness towards the revivalist movement. He felt very rejected by it, and I would guess, this whole drama that's about to play out is part of that bitterness, because his writing really was not at all supported by that movement. So Richards has dropped him, and so then Joyce has to find another publisher. Like I said, he's rejected by many other publishers, and in 1909, Dubliners gets picked up by Monsell and Company, which is a Dublin-based publishing house established to support new Irish writing, which would be Joyce, right? This is not his first published piece, but it's, it's a major one. By 1912, 3 years later, Monsell and Company had dropped Joyce's contract due to Joyce's refusal to make alterations to the text that they had requested in order for it to be publishable. We've kind of gone through some of these changes story by story in our series on Dubliners, so if you really want to know about those specifics, you know, especially I think like the Ivy Day episode, the Two Gallants episode, I think Counterparts, The Encounter, The Sisters, they're all controversial in their own special ways, so go listen to those episodes. Joyce was furious at this second dropped contract, and it was on the back of that very contract from Monsell and Company that had been broken that Joyce wrote this angry poem, Gas from a Burner. That's what this all has to do. Things sort of turned around after that. He submitted Dubliners, another string of rejections, and then it was re-accepted by Grant Richards in London from Hutton, despite having been maligned in Joyce's public appeals to the press, because he was scorched earth with James Joyce. You can imagine how angry you would be, dear listener, if this was you. Now imagine how angry James Joyce was. When these publishers wouldn't budge, he left no stone unturned trying to win influential people to his side to get them to change their mind. And he had publicly denounced Grant Richards, who then picked him up. In 1914, it was finally published in London, 8.5 years after this debacle began, and then the American edition followed in 1916. That's the broad strokes of this story. So the question arises then, why was publishing Dubliners so difficult? What do you think? Do you have any guesses?
You could read the book today and there's nothing in it that a modern reader would take offense by. So it's very hard to put yourself on the head of somebody in 1904 or 6 or 10 or 11. It's a different world. Andre Previn gave a music lecture in the 80s on British television, and he said that when Beethoven's 7th Symphony, the Pastoral Symphony, was performed first, a lot of people thought it was dissonant. And Previn said, we can't put our ears into their ears. We can't hear what they heard because we've heard so much music. In rock music especially, and modern music, and also classical, modern classical, is so different and so much more radical. So the things that are shocking people in this book are so far beneath anything that would shock us.
My go-to is always Stravinsky's Rite of Spring, where people like tore up the theater because they were so angry at it.
Yeah.
And that was a piece of music I learned about as a child in school.
Yeah. But I think there's probably people today who would be shocked by it, like if they've grown up in, you know, like sort of vanilla backgrounds, they would go, what is this I'm listening to? Like,
but they wouldn't tear up a theater over it. They might turn it off or be like, this isn't for me. Yeah. I'm not a huge Stravinsky listener. I've never particularly loved the Rite of Spring, but even if I can appreciate it as an art piece, but I'm like not willing to do property damage over it.
Yeah, Ravel's Bolero had that effect, and Ravel said, don't ever play this by itself. Only play it with dance because nobody will notice the repetition.
Can I tell you something? This is an exclusive for patrons only, although I think this probably falls in the first 10 minutes that we use as a preview. I was thinking of Ravel's Bolero just this morning because I find something about its tone to be mocking. It's just the same phrase over and over again.
Right. Just getting louder
just
and
builds.
louder and louder. Yeah.
And it's just, it feels like it's taunting me. I've also never liked Ravel's Bolero for that reason.
Oh, okay. Steve Reich did a minimalist piece performed in New York in the 70s, and it was, I think, 4 organs, and this just big ding, 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 ding. I mentioned it before, ding, 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 ding. Now, and the drones go out longer and longer and longer, and the 1970s New York audience like revolted. They don't know they tear up seats, but they were like yelling and screaming, and he was like really pissed off, and his friend said, Steve, you did it, this is great. Like, it's so hard to shock people anymore. And it's like they were hearing something new, like really new. And it's like when you played me Rick Beato's video on Angine de Poitrine.
Ah, yes.
I'm like, oh, this is so great. I'm hearing something new. It's been 20 years since I heard anything that sounded this new. The Shock of the New is the famous book by What's-His-Face. But that is, it's a delight when you're open to it. And it's upsetting when you're not.